I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made.
He's really not that funny.
The minute I dropped out,
Steve Jobs.
I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me
Like Taylor Swift
and
or
begin
something.
dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting.
They're pretty typical
It wasn't all romantic.
speech.
I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night
admirable
to
speech.
get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple.
That's what he's going for.
I loved
guess.
it.
I don't know.
And much of what I stumbled into by
I
following
guess so.
my
It is
curiosity
old
and
speech.
intuition turned out to be priceless later on.
I guess it is. I don't
Let me
know.
give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country.
It's still
Throughout the campus, every poster,
his calligraphy
every
class is still
label on every
pointless.
drawer
You don't need to
was
know all that. You don't need to have all this
beautifully
font,
Because
sans
I
serif,
dropped out
font
and
and
didn't have to
computers.
take
It's not
the
that
normal
important.
classes,
It's really not
I
that
decided
important.
to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying
You can have
the
one
amount of space
typeface
between
and
different letter
everything.
combinations,
I
about
don't
what
know.
makes great typography great.
Typography isn't
It was beautiful, historical,
that important, is it? I
artistically
don't think it
subtle
is.
in a way that science can't capture. And I found it fascinating.
I don't
None of this
know.
had even a hope of any practical
everything in
application
sans serif?
in my life.
Pretty much everything
But
is
10 years
everything was
later,
on sans
when we
serif.
were designing the first Macintosh computer,
You know, if he
it all
didn't
came
learn
back
it
to
though,
me. And we
eventually
designed
someone
it
would have
all into the
came
Mac.
along with
It
knowing
was the first
typography
computer with
and
beautiful
installed it into
typography.
computers.
If I had
by
never
now.
dropped
So
in
really,
on that single course in college,
if he had never dropped
the
in,
Mac would have never
life
had
would be the
multiple
same for everyone
typefaces or
still.
proportionally spaced fonts. And since
You didn't
Windows
need to
just
do
copied
that.
the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer
Well,
would have them.
You know, by now after 20 years, after 2 years, after 1 year, someone would come along.
I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class.
His
and
story,
personal computers might not
no.
have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course,
No.
it was impossible to
His
connect the
point
dots
is
looking
little
forward when I was in college.
moot.
But it was
or
very,
something.
very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again,
He has
you
no
can't
point
connect
here.
the dots looking forward. You can only
The
connect
dots will be
them looking
connected.
backwards. So you have to trust
You
that the
don't-
dots will somehow connect in your
Trust-
future. You have to trust in something. Your gut, destiny,
They're
life,
just saying
karma,
follow
whatever.
your passion.
Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart,
passion.
even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference.
He didn't need to do that. It just
My
He
second
didn't do
story is about love and loss. I was lucky.
It doesn't matter.
I
It's not.
found what I loved to do early in life.
It's not follow your passion.
Roz and I started Apple in my
I
parents'
guess it's
garage
okay.
when I was 20.
Message.
We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the
second
future
story.
began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly.
Board of directors. I don't think Zuckerberg has a board of directors. I think he just owns the whole thing.
And it was devastating.
Zuckerberg owns his whole
I really
company.
didn't know what to do for
Zuckerberg
a
is
few
the
months.
board.
I felt that I'd let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down.
I think Zuckerberg
that I
has
dropped the baton as it was being
has
passed
one
to me.
say in everything.
I met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods in my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer-animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, and I returned to Apple, and the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Maureen and I have a wonderful family together. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going...
It's just the old argument, whether you follow your passion or you get a 9-to-5 job.
And that is as true for work as it is for
But
your lovers.
everyone could, make their own
Your work is going to
decision.
fill a large part of your life. And the only way to be
I don't think
truly
everyone should just follow their
satisfied is to do
passion.
what you believe is great work. And
You
the
just
only way to
do
do
what you
great
think.
work is to love what you do.
Do what you want
If
to
you
do.
haven't found it yet, keep looking.
I think
And
everyone
don't
can
settle.
figure that out for themselves.
As
It's
with
not
all
a,
matters of the heart, you'll
it's
know
not a
when you
problem,
find it.
people.
And like any great relationship, it just gets
You need to
better and
figure
better
out.
as the years roll on.
Not a
So
big
keep
deal.
looking. Don't settle.
We don't need to touch on this. Whether you need to follow your passion or work
Each
a
day,
9-to-5
as if it
job.
was your last, someday
Not a
you'll most
point.
certainly be right. It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself,
I think that's what this whole
if
speech is
today
about,
were the
though.
last day of my life,
He's just telling people to
would I
follow
wanna
his
do
passion,
what
follow
I'm
their
about
passion,
to do
and
today?
they could
And
possibly be
whenever
like
the
him.
answer has
But
been no for too many days in a row, I know
I
I
think
need
people
to change
know.
something.
People are adults. I think.
Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the
That's
big
pretty much the
choices
gist
in
of his
life.
speech. I think.
Because almost everything, all external expectations,
so.
all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart.
Nah, not
About a year
everyone's gonna
ago,
make it though.
I was diagnosed with cancer.
I don't know.
I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and
He's,
it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. I didn't
He's
even
just
know
coming
what
from him.
pancreas was. The doctors told me this was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should
They're
expect
just trying to
live
create
no
movement
longer
when you don't really
than
need to
3
have
to 6
movement.
months.
No
My
need to move
doctor
anywhere.
advised me to go home and
I would
get my
just stay
affairs
still.
in order, which is
That's
doctor's
fine.
code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids